Hi, I'm Peter Kavanagh, and we're looking at Mark's Gospel, chapter 4, the end of the chapter, the storm at sea, or Jesus calms the storm, and thinking of ways in which we can glean wisdom from this story as it may pertain to the coronavirus crisis in which we currently find ourselves. The story begins with this. Jesus says to them, "Let us go across to the other side." In other words, the story begins with a wonderful plan. It starts off with a route map, a goal, a destination, an ETA as well. Like whenever you go for a journey, you might likely, or most likely might know how long it's going to take. And here these Galilean fishermen would have had the same. This journey lasts about an hour, maybe an hour or two, and they would be on the other side. Let us go across to the other side. And then suddenly a furious storm arrives. We set out with great plans, and do you remember New Year 2020? Do you remember January of 2020 when you were thinking about all that this year would entail and how it would look, and maybe what it was that you were going to do, the goals you had, and maybe when they were going to be achieved? And yet suddenly a storm has come, and our life goals, for some of us, ministry goals, for some of us, our own development, our career plans, relationship plans, are suddenly all at sea. Now here's something wonderful. At the end of this story, we won't spoil it, but you probably know that everything's okay, and they do get to the other side. Just as we will get to the other side of this Lake 2020. But what we don't often factor in is that there is a messy middle. A little bit in the middle of the story, which in a sense is what the story is actually about. The way that we traverse through the difficulties. I want to encourage those of you who feel that God spoke to them about things that were about to happen in your life, in your ministry, churches that were going to be planted, plans that you had. And yet here you are in the midst of the messy middle. I want to encourage you that in the Bible, there's quite often a messy middle. I think how wonderful it would have been for Joseph, for example, in the Old Testament, if God had given him the ability to interpret dreams, and then at that time a chariot had arrived from Pharaoh to say, "Does anyone around here know how to interpret a dream about a big fat cow?" "Oh, I do." "Well, come here, young man." That'd be great. Instead, no, there's a huge messy middle where he has to be betrayed and then lied about and put in prison, etc. Wouldn't it have been great if God had spoken to Moses as a young man to call him to release the children of Israel from the grip of Egypt. But no, instead he had to go all the way through, according to Acts chapter 7, all the way through to his 80th year of all sorts of adventures and journeys before that could happen. That was one big messy middle. Or picking up Moses, had he gone to Pharaoh and said, "Let my people go," and Pharaoh said, "Okay," but no, there was a very messy middle. And then they came, of course, to the sea, the impenetrable sea, and of course it opened before them, but just before it did, the Egyptian chariots arrived. There was a messy middle. And I want to encourage you that the things you thought 2020 would be about, I get that that's not what they have proven to be about. But I don't want you to be discouraged. In the economy of God, there is very often the word of the Lord. We go to the other side. And then there is the arrival, like as happens here in Mark chapter 5 and verse 1. They came to the other side of the sea. But in God's economy, very often there's that middle section where doors don't just open, where barriers do not just fall down, where the traffic lights are not green, and we are forced to say that this is not just about a simple journey, but this is about trusting the Lord from beginning to end. I don't just trust that God has spoken to me. No, I trust that God will guide me even on the journey.